Start on the...
So what are we saying? Today we declare war on Rick Beato.
Not that. Hello guys and welcome back to the Compass Box channel. I'm here with our good friend Pratyay Chakrabarti. I mean, you've seen him on the videos. He's pretty much responsible for all the mix and masters you see here. And he's the violin player, backing vocalist extraordinaire. You know Pratyay, everybody knows Pratyay. And today we've got something special in mind.
Yes, so...
What do we have in mind, Pratyay?
As you guys might know, or might not know, we are big fans of Rick Beato, who is a very eminent YouTube music personality and educator. And you know, we've been following his stuff for a lot of time, related to music theory, engineering, everything. But today we have a bit of a bone to pick, don't we, Ram?
It's a tiny bone.
Tiny bone. But so recently, a few months ago, he did a video where he talks about what, in his opinion, are the top 20 inventions that changed music. And while we agree with
I think the whole list,
pretty much most of it, if not all of it, one little contention that we have is that the entire list is a little too centered around, you know, Western music and Western pop culture, and we didn't feel it comprehensively represented music from all around the world. And we are from India, as our viewers might know. So we thought we had a few things to add that might just round out the list and make it more representative and intersectional, so to say.
Absolutely. And to be clear, this is not a react video. We're not reacting to the things that he said.
Nor is it a diss video.
It's not a diss video either. Like we said, you know, we're both huge fans of Rick Beato. His stuff that he's done on, like, you know, the what makes this song great and stuff are really, really incredible. You should go check his channel out. And he's done this list with another YouTuber called Red Shull, who's another guitar. He's a guitarist. He's a music producer. Great guy again. Awesome channel. But yeah, I think while watching it, we just realized that it was not representative of music from all cultures. And you know, when you study music theory and if you go to music school, you get like Western music and non-Western music, which is a weird term to basically give the rest of the music around the world.
Yeah, exactly. Non-West.
Non-Western music, right? So we want to add a couple of mentions on that list we want to add a couple of mentions on that list that may add some light to some of the things that Rick has already mentioned. Let's just see how this list goes. And if you guys have anything else that you feel should have been added that we didn't consider, please go ahead and add it in the comments below. And we'd love to know from your side, from your culture, or from your music, what you think was like something we missed out. We have a list of 13 or 14 things that we wanted to add to that list. It's not in any particular order. I think we're going to try to do it chronologically. We'll start off with the oldest.
The oldest and the moldiest.
We'll start off with the oldest invention and then sort of just move up the ages to modern day. And first on that list is acoustically designed spaces, or spaces that are engineered and constructed specifically for music performance or reproduction. So, you know, I think the earliest example of this can be, you know, in the ancient Greek culture, they had these amphitheaters that were built for music performance. And, you know, we didn't have microphones or electronic amplification at that time. So they needed a way that the voices would carry all the way to the back of the theater. And so these spaces were designed in such a way that even an unamplified voice could reach the last row and the last performer. So which is, I think, a huge undertaking and a huge influence. Such an important invention, because from an engineering standpoint, we had to understand acoustics and sound to the point where we can create spaces that can propagate sound a little further, right? And the word amphitheater is also etymologically is Greek, I think.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is.
And I think it dates back, the earliest sort of references we could find in our limited research was the 6th century BCE. That's not before Christ 8. That's before Common Era.
8.
If we can decide modern history based on when he was born, I'm sure we can do something on when he ate.
But it's A, not A, it's BCE.
No, it's BCE, yeah.
So like 8,
oh,
the
shit.
number?
No, I meant
You don't know how to spell.
So yeah, so 6th century BCE is the earliest records we could find about ancient Greek amphitheaters. And of course it went on to the Romans.
Yeah.
They were famous for their colosseums and for their large amphitheaters where you could have large crowds with a relatively small performance, and most of the people could hear it.
And that paved the way for, our modern concert halls and opera houses and even, a structure like the studio, which is built very particularly for an acoustic purpose. So I think just acoustically designed spaces is a big invention that shouldn't be left out from the more influential music inventions that definitely changed music forever.
One of the key things that I think Rick missed out, which is flooded in the comments, is that the microphone is such an important invention of modern day music that it was kind of a surprise for most people that Rick Beato did not include that on his list.
Speaking of microphones, or in general electric amplification, I think that really paved the way for all the modern music industry as we know it. I mean, we just talked about amphitheaters and unamplified performances, but then the next step to that, for music to actually be recorded and to reach people, you needed a way to convert your voice to an electronic signal, which could then be stored, yada, yada, yada. I mean, Rick talked about storage mediums like vinyl and CD and magnetic tape, but the first source of that, I think, the microphone and then the loudspeaker, I think those are huge inventions that were surprisingly missed out, but I think should be added back.
The first microphone and loudspeaker kinda was invented in the late 1870s. 77, 76, I think, was around the time where both the microphone and the loudspeaker, which are basically reverse engineered versions of each other, were invented during that time.
Yeah, there were a lot of parallel inventions happening, a lot of people working independently on similar stuff. So I think around 1916 is when the first condenser microphone came out. And then shortly was followed by 1923, which is the ribbon microphone. And I think in between there was a dynamic microphone, which is something we were surprised to find out.
I was expecting to find the dynamic moving coil microphone first, then the ribbon, and then the condenser. But it was really weird. Based on our research, we found that the condenser was the first microphone and predates both of them by almost a decade, which is quite incredible. I think, and we know for a fact that ribbons were the mainstream microphone used at the time because of its natural, linear response, the fact that it was pretty easy to maintain. And I'm guessing the electronics at the time were not good enough to have a really good quality condenser mic, I'm guessing, which is probably why they came into popularity much, much later on.
So the first mic that was a carbon type mic that was introduced in 1877 by a man called David Edward Hughes from England. And then I think it was in 1916 when E.C. Wendt, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he is the one who came up with the ribbon.
The condenser mic,
The condenser mic, And some fairly popular names like Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison were also involved in developing their versions of things, which then got refined to the microphone as we sort of know it today.
The Blumleiner was also a name that came about in like the improvement of a microphone design as well. And
then of course Shure.
Then of course
the Shure brothers
Shure.
With the SM57 and 58, which we still use
today,
literally everywhere to this day.
The cool thing is that we were checking some of the research on that, and the electric amplifier was invented around 1912, 1913. So I'm confused. And hopefully somebody in the comments can tell us how it works.
More knowledgeable about how the loudspeaker can predate the amplifier.
Yeah, because if the loudspeaker was invented in 1877, but the first electronic amp was in the early 1900s, what did they use to drive the loudspeaker? If electrodes?
Challenge.
I mean, you guys should...
loudspeaker challenge.
Next on the list is oral traditions, and specifically in our Indian context, the idea of the Guru-Shishya relationship, which we know from Vedic texts, which is like ancient Indian texts, that this was a form of tutorage that students would go through and have this very clear relationship and authority structure between their teacher and themselves.
And Rick mentioned, I think as his number one in the list being music notation, but in particular he mentioned Western music notation, which is like 12-tone sheet music that we know, and he said that was probably the most important thing that changed music completely. Maybe for Western music, but honestly, Indian classical music, Middle Eastern music, a lot of music that doesn't just at all follow the Western notation, they're doing fine.
And survived for a long time without the notation format.
Every day. So I don't think Western notation is as all-encompassing as Rick might have pointed out. Maybe for his experience, sure. But, from our experience, and, Indian classical music always has had a very oral tradition of being passed down just by memorization and being passed from teacher to teacher to teacher through generations. And we don't really have a very formalized script or formalized street writing rules for Indian music, be it Hindustani or Carnatic. And in some places, the Western notation just isn't enough to signify the musical contexts.
Yep.
Like in Middle Eastern music, you have microtonal music, and Western notation doesn't really allow the space to represent that sort of music. Notation definitely is important when working in a band context. I mean, we use it all the time too.
Yeah. I mean, I think the one of the important learnings is that the bulk of music development did not happen through notation, actually.
Yeah.
The bulk of musical development over the history of man has been through oral traditions. So the invention of figuring out a language to pass down what you've learned about music to your student and that sort of chain continues on, that's the invention that's, I think, more important, because the bulk of music history has relied on that than Western notation. And Western notation has to adapt to the microtones, and it has to adapt to like the half flats and the half sharps and the stuff like that. So it's not designed natively to support the kind of musical cultures that uses something over a 12-tone system to define an octave. So yeah, Western
Plus,
notation.
we just don't have the same ideas of harmony. I mean, Indian classical music doesn't really have a concept of harmony at all. So a lot of that isn't really even useful for our traditions.
One of the inventions that Rick mentioned that actually prompted this question in my head in the first place was his induction of the piano on that list. And of course, the piano is an incredibly important invention which we still use today. But the idea of having a hammered string instrument being like, oh, that was like the genesis of that, I felt was slightly incorrect. In Indian music and Persian music and Middle Eastern music, we have an instrument called the Santoor.
Yeah, or basically a hammered dulcimer, you might call it, to generally classify that sort of instrument. And that instrument has been around since what, 1600?
1600 BCE.
1600, was that the date?
1600 to 900 BCE.
Yeah. So that's Santoor, and its predecessors have been around since like 1600 BCE. And it developed in the Mesopotamian civilization. So the piano, while important, is like a much, much later incarnation of it. And, again, like we mentioned with the last point, in Indian music or Middle Eastern music, the Santoor will be still way more prominent than the piano. So,
easily, yeah.
Yeah, so its importance shouldn't be understated to that of the piano. So yes, piano is important, but I think it's a descendant of a much more ancient group of instruments.
Yeah.
So I think if we were to mention our pick for that category of hammered string instrument, I think it would be the Santoor or its ancient predecessors.
And we're not saying that the piano is a successor to the Santoor either. We're not saying that the construction and the development of the piano is based on the Santoor, because they could have happened independently. But the fact that the Santoor as a concept of a hammered string instrument had existed way before the harpsichord, way before the piano, is something that is worth mentioning at least. Next on the list is music schools. Now, music schools we've talked a little bit about in terms of just the tutorage of learning and passing down information through the Guru Shishya format. And in the Western sort of, Western tradition and Western cultures, you had, patronage and you had tutors to help you learn an instrument. But the idea of having a music school, a space where it is a formalized education specifically for the focus of vocational application, I think is something that's important.
I think music as a profession really took off from there. And, obviously there were professional musicians before that. But, as a formalized, generalized curriculum to follow for everybody. And also, I would say, really democratize the process of learning music. So, like, anybody can be a music student. It's like any other school, any other vocational school. So following music as a profession really started from music school. So I would say that is a pretty important invention in the development of music. Again, not to say that music school is necessary for
absolutely.
a music profession.
We had examples of that.
We had examples of that. How successful, you decide in the comments maybe. But I would say it is a very important invention and milestone in making music as a vocation available to a larger section of the public.
No, absolutely. And, I'm remembering a little bit of music history that I learned back in school. The first polyphonic piece of music was at least in the Western tradition, was a piece called organum. which was actually developed in the University of Notre Dame or something like that. So the music school, in a way, was also kind of responsible for harmony, perhaps. We could make that leap and that judgment.
Bold claim.
If you know what I'm talking about, please mention that on the comment, because I could be wrong about this completely.
Definitely for the development and research in music, especially in the later stages, music schools definitely have played a big role in that. So what do you think about that?
Next on the list is a concept called temperament, which again we kind of saw plenty of people mentioning this in the comments for the Rick Beato video. And a temperament is fundamentally what? It's a system to define how many spaces and semitones will you have between two octaves, right? That's ultimately what a temperament is. And historically, there have been many different ways of dividing the octave into different parts. Most of them historically have been unequal, which means in the modern day piano, when you go up a semitone, each distance between those notes is exactly the same, something we call now equal temperament. But most of history had uneven amounts of semitones. Some semitones used to be larger than others, like in just intonation, for example. The major third is flatter than what it is in equal temperament.
And the thing with that kind of intonation is one instrument could only be tuned to one key at a time. So you can't, if your piano is tuned to play C major, you can't just suddenly play D major again, because all the ratios will have to change. So you'll have to tune the entire piano just to play the D major. So if you have to change keys within the song, you're kind of screwed there. So equal temperament, the invention of that, I think really, really simplified all that. It isn't perfect.
Absolutely
those ratios don't occur in nature, but it does make our lives much simpler to switch keys, to be able to play all 12 keys on the same instrument. So that, I think, is a huge invention that Rick didn't mention and was mentioned in the comments a lot. And even apart from, okay, let's just leave equal temperaments, as again, that is a very Western concept aside. We talked again in our earlier segment about microtonal music. So, a lot of Middle Eastern music, or even other cultures, they follow systems that are not just limited to the 12 notes that you have in the Western system. We have 9-tone, 12-tone, 24-tone, 21-tone. So those, again, are all different systems and formalized under different temperaments. So just the invention of this concept to define the division of the octave, I think, is a huge invention to both simplifying existing music and also making other kinds of music and even other instruments possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact that what Pratik is also saying, that it's not a perfect system. I mean, the piano is, and there are plenty of videos on this online explaining how the piano is not perfectly in tune. And in an equal temperament system, we just mathematically cannot do that. But the fact still remains is that this has now become the de facto temperament system of modern pop music for the last couple of 100 years. I mean, I think equal temperament came around the Renaissance Baroque period, if I'm wrong about that.
We're using you as our fact checkers here.
We just make claims. You guys decide if they're true or not. The idea of if you have a temperament, an instrument that is tuned to a very specific temperament, if you try to play that same melody in another key, it will not have the same melodic information as before, because, as Pratik said, the semitones and the whole tones are now significantly different than they were in the previous key.
For the next thing, I think we have a huge topic and a huge industry, especially to which, as Indians, we feel the impact of every day, whether positively or negatively remains to be debated, which I think is film. And, music as a standalone thing obviously had a lot of development before that. But I know for a fact that, at least in a country like India, music and film are, especially towards popular consumption, they are inextricably linked.
Absolutely.
So I think the invention of film and the propagation of film as a medium to then carry music and their interaction with each other as a storytelling format is a huge invention that shouldn't be missed. Again, we're really being informed by a Bollywood context, and Bollywood, in India, the music industry is basically the Bollywood industry, which is the film industry. There's almost no separation. Only in recent times have we had a bit of an independent music bloom, of which we are maybe a little part of. tiny bit. But apart from that, the gigantic mammoth behemoth of an industry still remains Bollywood, which is basically the film industry. So again, considering from other cultures' perspectives, I think film should not be ignored as a huge medium for the propagation of music to the masses.
Absolutely. And even if you think about it from a Western context, when we think about the silent film time, films were never really silent. They always had music, to back them up. We say silent purely from a, dialogue perspective, but movies have always had music in them. And like Pratik is saying, in India, chances are the idea of having music that is not linked to a movie is still a very, very new concept for the majority of India, because we listen to music that comes from movies. Next on the list is a very, very important one, I think. Moving from mono to stereo. Now, stereo recordings was invented by Alan Blumlein in the early 1930s. In fact, he was so profound as an engineer that we have a miking technique called the Blumlein array, or the Blumlein pair, where you basically take two figure-8 microphones and put them in a coincident pair of 90 degrees with each other, and you get this stereophonic image immediately that comes out of it. So, Alan, thank you so much for that.
And I think stereo audio, we as a modern generation take for granted, because we don't really know anything else from it. We were born to having two headphones in our ear playing left and right sound separately, but for a very long time it was just one channel. Everything was summed to one channel. And I know if you hear the early experiments with stereo audio, especially like in some early Beatles records and stuff, it'll sound weird to you, because the entire drum kit is on the left and the bass is on the right. So it's been a long journey to where we are now. So, and I think it was in 1956 or somewhere in the 1950s that the first stereo vinyl record was ever released. And the first recordings were, I think, classical music that a lot of them Blumlein himself did. Then others were done in some big studios. And then gradually that moved to movies. And then that came to popular music, and now we can't even think of a world without stereo music. When was the last time you heard a song that was in mono? Okay, the next one on the list is analog to digital conversion, and then digital to analog. So, as we know, in modern times, pretty much everything is recorded digitally at least some level of the process. We don't really record exclusively to tape and work on tape anymore. So everything is recorded into a computer, edited there, and finally exported from there. And I think the invention of that step, the conversion of high quality audio into high quality digital and then converting it back without loss, without any significant loss in quality, I think that's a huge, huge invention that shouldn't be ignored. We have audio interfaces, which are basically literally an interface between the audio, the analog world, and the digital computer. They had predecessors apparently called hard disk recording system in the 80s, which is insane. We don't know anything about it. This is the first time we heard of it while researching for this. But again, if there are any experts out there who can enlighten us more about this topic, please leave a comment, leave some links. We'd love to read more about this. But since the 80s and then the 90s, we have had these audio interfaces which can act as standalone devices which connect to a computer with normal USB or Firewire or even Thunderbolt ports today to enable us to record audio right into a computer at very, very good qualities, industry standard qualities. And because of that, now you don't even need to have a full studio to record,
This is all pointless.
This is all pointless, really. You can do, honestly, an entire album right from your bedroom. It's that easy these days. So ADDA conversion is a huge invention.
And its application specifically for musicians and engineers into an audio interface, which is a package that you can put in your backpack and then record anywhere in the world, is quite amazing, because it means that as an artist or as a band, you now no longer need the professional studio in order to translate your music into the digital domain anymore, which is so amazing.
And Rick mentioned PCs and then DAWs, which are Pro Tools and stuff. But I think this one is the missing link.
It's bridging that gap.
Thought we should fill it in there to complete that connection between the musician and the digital world.
Next on the list is something that, if you ask any musician, is an invaluable tool for their musical journey and development and progress. It's the metronome.
But also an enemy.
But also, that's true. We have a love-hate relationship with the metronome as musicians. So the metronome is next on the list.
Yeah, I think the metronome was invented back in 1817? 1815. Okay, fine. I'll do that again. So the metronome was invented back in 1815 by a guy named Johann Maelzel. That was when he patented it. And here's the interesting part. He patented it with the name Instrument/machine for the improvement of all musical performances
called metronome. That's the official designation of the product.
So remember that the next time you open up the metronome app in your phone. But yeah, the metronome has become an invaluable tool for practice, for learning, for recording, just to keep in time.
Yep.
And every musician at whatever level is recommended to practice with a metronome, to keep playing with a metronome. And of course, once you're in the studio, you pretty much almost always have to record to a metronome. And even if you're not recording to it, it's an invaluable tool to strengthen your sense of rhythm and time. And this again was something that was mentioned a lot in Rick Beato's comment section. So yeah, a metronome should be up in that list. Very important musical invention. Next up in the list is an invention that has become a really, really solid foundation of a lot of electronic music and dance music since the late 70s and 80s.
Yeah. I mean, the 80s was pretty much like just that music. People call it synth music, right? I mean, 80s was pretty much...
I didn't even mention that it's the point of synthesizer.
We've given it away now.
Spoiler alert, synthesizers and sampling. Both were sort of developed in that time period in the 70s and 80s. Yeah. You had the Moog synths that came out in the 60s and then 70s, and then the Yamaha DX7 in 83, which was the first mass-produced synth, which then became hugely popular and then gave way to so many more synths. But yeah, those were the first that, popularized concepts such as voltage control oscillators and envelopes and filters that now are inextricable from every electronic musician's or producer's toolkit. I think that has defined a huge chunk of the music that we have consumed in the modern age. So that is definitely, and if not an honorable mention, definitely an important part of music history in general.
For sure. I mean, this is also mentioned a lot in the Rick Beato comments, and the idea of being able to manipulate a sine wave or a sound and use the different parameters that a synthesizer provides to craft and mold your own sound became such an important tool in the 80s. And even now, like, people kind of have their own fingerprint of their synth sounds in the modern electronic world as well.
And it was something really novel to create sound from scratch.
Yeah.
Because before that, everything was you play an instrument and you record its sound. You're starting with like the fundamentals of like a physical sound wave, and then you're adjusting parameters and modulating stuff and creating all these crazy sounds from scratch, which was, I think, a really exciting development and a real milestone in music history.
The last on the list, which is a fairly recent invention, is going to be independent distribution services. If you were a band or a musician, I mean, I want to say even like as early as like 10, 20 years ago, the only way you could release your music and distribute your music to the public and to the consumers would have to be going through a label, because they have the buying power required to print CDs, to print vinyl, to get airtime on radio. Now we've reached a point in which you can do that entirely on your own, sitting at home, go to a website, upload your music, and now it's going to compete on the same platforms as Taylor Swift on Spotify or Ariana Grande on Apple Music.
Yeah, and I think that's like the development of that is tied to the evolution of streaming services and digital music. We don't really rely as much on physical printing of music as we did, which massively cuts down the cost of distribution. We don't have to have 50,000 CDs or vinyls printed anymore. You can just have your music up digitally, which makes the way for independent labels to be possible at all. And just as examples, in India, we have CD Baby, OK Listen, and services like this, which distribute your music to all the popular DSPs and platforms, which I think is a huge cultural shift for the modern musicians. I mean, we can still go on complaining about the payouts of platforms, and that debate is ongoing, but you cannot deny that it's so much easier to just get your music out there for a potentially huge audience in the same ballpark as these big acts. Of course, it's not like you're going to have the same reach as Taylor Swift on day one.
Yeah.
But still, it's possible. It's just that you can even compete and have your music be
on
in
the
that
same
platform
is
it's
quite
mind-blowing.
incredible.
For a musician 30 years ago, that just would not have been imaginable without a huge label pushing a lot of money through that. But now you can just do it from home.
For the longest time, YouTube and SoundCloud were the ways musicians used to put their music up, because obviously they don't have the money or the backing of a label. But the moment independent distribution companies came into the play, they realized that, wow, I can get my music on Apple Music for like $20 or Spotify. That's incredible, and that's giving so much power back to the musicians to make their own music on their own terms as well, because now you don't need the final approval of a label head to say, okay, no, actually change this or change that. So we are also getting this weird expanse and development of very niche and experimental kinds of music as well, because they're like, what the hell? Well, I'm not going to lose anything, so I'll just put it out there.
So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that list, and like we said before, not to diss Rick or we don't even disagree with any of what he said.
I agree with everything that he said.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter that his opinion is informed by his experiences of music. And again, to be fair, he never really mentioned that this was the be-all and end-all of all music ever.
Yeah.
It was his opinion. And I think what we're doing is merely adding our perspective to that to make it a more inclusive or a more, global standard or perspective from that. We felt as musicians from India that it was maybe a little too centered around Western pop culture and Western developments of music. So we just thought we'd add our 2 cents to not only fill out some of the missing blanks there, but also to round it out in terms of our culture and our lived experience as musicians.
And to be fair, I'm sure there are plenty of you who are coming up with your own sort of personal, music cultures and going and saying, hey, but what about this instrument? What about that? Please add them in the comments below, because I think one thing Rick, we had to probably figure out in the process of making that top 20 list is that you can't include everything.
Yeah.
So he just went with the biggest things that have influenced his life as a musician as well. And we're kind of doing the same over here. And this is not, again, the be-all, end-all sort of list. This is going to be an exhaustive list, as it should be, because there are so many events in music history and so many people responsible for the development of music over time. And we're just continuing the conversation.
Yeah. Like,
share, subscribe,
comment, hit that bell icon, all the regular YouTube stuff. Go check out Rick's video on his channel. Shout us out to him if you like this video. Maybe get him to watch it, and we'd love to know what he thinks about it. We love you, Rick.
See you guys.